In the sprawling expanse of Denver International Airport, with its iconic tent-like roof reminiscent of the snow-capped Rocky Mountains, a scene was unfolding that would soon capture the nation's attention. The airport, usually a hub of excitement and anticipation, became the stage for an incident that would expose the deep-seated prejudices still lurking beneath the surface of American society. Jasmine Carter, a 54-year-old African-American woman with an illustrious naval career spanning over 3 decades, stood at the boarding gate for Flight 1142 to Washington, D.C. Her posture was erect, her demeanor calm, a stark contrast to the bustling passengers around her. She wore civilian clothes, a tailored navy blue blazer over a crisp white shirt and pressed black slacks. Nothing in her appearance suggested her rank or the respect she commanded in her professional life. As the boarding process began, Jasmine patiently waited her turn. She watched as other passengers filed past, presenting their boarding passes and moving on to the jet bridge. When her group was called, she stepped forward, boarding pass and ID in hand. It was at this moment that the first ripple of what would become a tidal wave of controversy began. The gate agent, a young woman named Emily Parker, glanced at Jasmine's documents, then back at her. Emily's brow furrowed and she hesitated. "Ma'am, could you step aside for a moment?" she asked, her voice tinged with an uncertainty that immediately put Jasmine on alert. Confusion flickered across Jasmine's face, quickly replaced by a practiced neutrality. She had encountered similar situations before, though she had hoped her days of being singled out were behind her. With a slight nod, she stepped to the side, allowing other passengers to continue boarding. As Jasmine waited, she couldn't help but notice the sideways glances from other travelers. Some looked curious, others uncomfortable, and a few wore expressions of barely concealed suspicion. The weight of their stares pressed down on her, a familiar burden she had carried throughout her career. Emily conferred with her colleague, Mark Thompson, in hushed tones. Their eyes darted between Jasmine and her documents, their expressions a mix of confusion and growing concern. Jasmine stood tall, her face a mask of patience, even as her heart rate quickened. She had faced far more challenging situations in her career, but the humiliation of being singled out in public never lost its sting. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours to Jasmine. She watched as the last of the other passengers boarded, leaving her alone at the gate with the airline staff. The emptying terminal only amplified her sense of isolation. Finally, Emily approached Jasmine again, this time accompanied by her supervisor, a middle-aged man named Robert Hawkins. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Robert began, his tone a practiced blend of authority and faux sympathy, "but we're going to need you to step aside for additional screening." Jasmine's eyebrows rose slightly, the only outward sign of her growing frustration. "May I ask why?" she inquired, her voice steady and controlled. Robert shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Emily before responding. "We have some concerns about your documentation. It's probably nothing, but we need to verify a few things before we can allow you to board." Jasmine's mind raced. She had flown countless times without issue. What could possibly be wrong with her documentation? As a high-ranking naval officer, her credentials were impeccable. The realization of what was likely happening began to dawn on her, a familiar anger simmering just beneath her composed exterior. "I assure you, my documentation is in order," Jasmine stated firmly. "I have an important meeting to attend in Washington. Is there a problem with my boarding pass or ID?" Robert and Emily exchanged glances again, their discomfort palpable. "It's not that, ma'am," Emily said hesitantly. "It's just that, well, your ticket indicates a military discount and we need to verify your service status." The implication hung heavy in the air. Jasmine felt a surge of emotions, anger, disappointment, and a deep, weary sadness. After all these years, after all her accomplishments, she was still being judged by the color of her skin rather than the content of her character. Taking a deep breath, Jasmine reached into her bag. "I see," she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Perhaps this will help clarify things." From her bag, she produced her military ID, complete with her rank and position clearly displayed. The reaction was immediate. Emily's eyes widened in shock and Robert's face paled visibly. There, in clear, official print, was Jasmine's rank. Admiral Jasmine Carter, United States Navy. The atmosphere at the gate shifted dramatically. The earlier suspicion and doubt evaporated, replaced by a palpable sense of embarrassment and dawning horror. Robert stammered, struggling to find words. "Admiral Carter, I'm so sorry. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." Jasmine stood silently, allowing the weight of the moment to settle on those around her. She had faced similar situations throughout her career, each one a reminder of the prejudices that persisted despite her achievements. But this time felt different. This time, she decided, would be the last. As word of the incident spread through the airport, a crowd began to gather. Passengers who had already boarded the plane craned their necks to see what was happening. Airport staff whispered among themselves, news of the colossal mistake spreading like wildfire. Jasmine remained calm, her military training kicking in as she assessed the situation. She knew that her next actions would be crucial, not just for herself, but for countless others who faced similar discrimination every day. "I would like to speak with your superior," Jasmine said, her voice steady and authoritative, "and I will be boarding this flight. We can discuss this incident further upon my return from Washington." Robert nodded frantically, all pretense of authority abandoned. "Of course, Admiral. Right away. Please allow me to escort you onto the plane myself." As Jasmine was finally allowed to board, the other passengers watched in a mixture of awe and shame. Many had witnessed the earlier interaction and now realized the gravity of what had transpired. Some looked away, unable to meet Jasmine's eyes, while others offered apologetic smiles or nods of respect. The flight to Washington was tense, with whispers and glances directed at Jasmine throughout the journey. She sat quietly, her mind already formulating a plan. This incident, she decided, would not be swept under the rug. It would be a catalyst for change. Upon landing in Washington, Jasmine was met by a flurry of activity. News of the incident had already reached the highest levels of the Navy and the Department of Defense. Admiral Marcus Reeves, Jasmine's colleague and friend, was waiting for her at the gate. "Jasmine," he said, his face a mix of concern and barely contained anger. "I heard what happened. This is unacceptable. We're already working on a response." Jasmine nodded, her resolve strengthened by her friend's support. "Thank you, Marcus. But this isn't just about me. We need to ensure this never happens to anyone else." In the days that followed, the incident at Denver International Airport became a national talking point. News outlets ran the story continuously. Social media exploded with outrage and support, and politicians on both sides of the aisle issued statements condemning the airline's actions. Jasmine Carter found herself at the center of a media storm. Interview requests flooded in, and her phone rang constantly with calls from fellow military personnel, civil rights leaders, and even the White House. Through it all, Jasmine remained composed, using her newfound platform to address the larger issues at play. In a powerful interview with a national news network, Jasmine spoke eloquently about her experiences. "What happened to me is not an isolated incident," she said, her voice steady and her gaze direct. "It's a symptom of a larger problem that persists in our society. We've made progress, certainly, but incidents like this show us how far we still have to go." The airline, facing a public relations nightmare, issued a series of apologies and promised a full investigation. They announced mandatory sensitivity training for all staff and pledged to review their policies to prevent similar incidents in the future. But for Jasmine, these promises weren't enough. She saw an opportunity to push for more substantial change. Working with her superiors in the Navy and partnering with civil rights organizations, Jasmine began to draft a comprehensive plan to address racial bias in the airline industry and beyond. The plan, which would come to be known as the Carter Initiative, called for increased diversity in hiring practices, more robust training programs, and the establishment of an independent review board to handle complaints of discrimination. It also proposed partnerships between the military, airlines, and educational institutions to create pathways for minorities in aviation and related fields. As Jasmine worked tirelessly to turn her experience into a force for positive change, she reflected on the long journey that had brought her to this point. She thought about her childhood in a working-class neighborhood in Atlanta, where the idea of becoming an admiral had seemed like an impossible dream. She remembered the challenges she faced in the Navy, the subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination she encountered as she rose through the ranks. Each memory strengthened her resolve. She knew that her fight wasn't just for herself, but for every person who had ever been judged unfairly based on their appearance. It was for the young girls who might see her story and dare to dream bigger, and for the countless individuals who faced similar prejudices every day without the platform to speak out. As the Carter Initiative gained traction, Jasmine found herself traveling across the country, speaking at conferences, military bases, and universities. Her message was clear and consistent. Change was possible, but it required effort and commitment from everyone. In a particularly moving speech at the United States Naval Academy, Jasmine addressed an auditorium full of midshipmen. "Your uniform," she told them, "is a symbol of honor, courage, and commitment. But remember, beneath that uniform, we are all human. Our strength as a military and as a nation lies in our diversity. Never judge your fellow service members or any person by the color of their skin, but by the quality of their character and their actions." The impact of Jasmine's words and actions began to ripple out beyond the military and airline industry. Companies in various sectors started to reevaluate their own policies and practices. Schools incorporated discussions about unconscious bias into their curricula. The incident at Denver International Airport, once a source of shame, was being transformed into a catalyst for widespread social change. 6 months after the incident, Jasmine found herself back at Denver International Airport. This time, she was there by invitation. The airline, making good on its promises, had implemented many of the recommendations from the Carter Initiative. They had asked Jasmine to speak at the unveiling of a new training program for all staff. As she stood at the podium, looking out at a sea of faces that included airline staff, airport personnel, and members of the media, Jasmine felt a mix of emotions. There was pride in what had been accomplished, hope for the future, but also a lingering sadness for the fact that such changes were still necessary in the 21st century. 6 months ago, I stood in this airport and faced discrimination, Jasmine began, her voice strong and clear. Today, I stand here as a partner in progress. What happened to me was painful, but it has led to meaningful change. This is not the end of our journey, but rather a new beginning. She went on to detail the changes that had been implemented, praising the airline for its commitment to improvement, while also emphasizing that there was still work to be done. Change doesn't happen overnight, she reminded her audience. It requires constant effort, vigilance, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our society. As Jasmine concluded her speech, she was met with a standing ovation. The applause echoed through the terminal, a sound of hope and commitment to a better future. Among those clapping the loudest were Emily Parker and Robert Hawkins, the staff members involved in the original incident. Both had undergone extensive training and had become vocal advocates for change within the company. In the months and years that followed, the impact of the Carter Initiative continued to grow. Jasmine's story was incorporated into training materials, not just for airlines, but for police departments, schools, and corporations across the country. It became a case study in how to turn a moment of discrimination into an opportunity for education and growth. Jasmine herself continued to serve in the Navy, her experience only strengthening her commitment to her country and to the principles of equality and justice. She became a mentor to countless young officers, particularly women and minorities, helping to guide the next generation of military leaders. The incident at Denver International Airport, while painful, had become a turning point not just in Jasmine's life, but in the ongoing struggle for equality in America. It served as a powerful reminder that progress is possible, but it often comes at a cost. It requires brave individuals willing to stand up, speak out, and demand change. As Jasmine reflected on her journey, she thought about the long line of civil rights leaders who had come before her. She thought about the battles they had fought, the sacrifices they had made, and the progress they had achieved. She knew that her own struggle was just one more step on that long road to equality. But she also knew that each step mattered. Each time someone stood up against discrimination, each time a policy was changed, each time a mind was opened, the world became a little bit better. And so, Despite the challenges she had faced and the battles that still lay ahead, Jasmine Carter remained hopeful. She knew that change was possible because she had seen it happen. She had been a part of it, and she was committed to continuing that work, not just for herself, but for all those who would come after her. In the end, she realized that was what true leadership was all about, paving the way for others to follow, making the path a little easier for those who would come next. As Jasmine's plane took off from Denver International Airport that day, she looked out the window at the sprawling city below. She thought about how far she had come and how far society still had to go. But she was ready for the journey, whatever challenges it might bring. Because she knew that with each step forward, with each mind changed and each barrier broken, they were all moving closer to the kind of world she had always fought for. A world of true equality and justice for all. The story of Admiral Jasmine Carter and her experience at Denver International Airport didn't end with that flight. In many ways, it was just the beginning. The incident sparked a national conversation about racial bias and discrimination, forcing many to confront uncomfortable truths about the persistence of prejudice in modern America. In the years that followed, Jasmine became a powerful voice for change, using her platform to advocate for greater diversity and inclusion, not just in the military and the airline industry, but in all aspects of American life. She testified before Congress, spoke at international conferences, and wrote a best-selling memoir that inspired countless readers. The Carter Initiative, which had started as a response to a single incident of discrimination, grew into a comprehensive program for promoting equality and combating bias. It was adopted by organizations across the country, from small businesses to major corporations, from local police departments to federal agencies. One of the most significant impacts of the initiative was in education. Schools across the country began incorporating lessons about unconscious bias and the importance of diversity into their curricula. Children were taught from a young age to question their assumptions and to value differences. In the military, the changes were particularly profound. The Navy, inspired by Jasmine's example, launched a major push to increase diversity in its ranks, particularly in leadership positions. Recruitment efforts were expanded in underserved communities, mentorship programs were established to support minority officers, and training on cultural competence became a standard part of military education. The airline industry, too, underwent a transformation. The incident at Denver International Airport had been a wake-up call, forcing companies to confront the reality of racial bias among their staff and in their policies. New guidelines were established for passenger interactions, emphasizing respect and fairness regardless of a person's appearance or background. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in the lives of individuals. Jasmine received countless letters from people who had been inspired by her story. There was the young African-American girl who decided to pursue a career in aviation after hearing Jasmine speak. There was the airline employee who stood up to a colleague's racist comment, citing the Carter Initiative as his inspiration. There was the naval officer who found the courage to report discrimination in her unit, knowing that leaders like Jasmine had paved the way. 5 years after the incident, Jasmine returned to Denver International Airport once again. This time, she was there to unveil a permanent exhibit dedicated to promoting diversity and inclusion in air travel. The exhibit featured interactive displays, teaching visitors about the history of discrimination in transportation and the ongoing efforts to create a more equitable system. As Jasmine cut the ribbon to open the exhibit, she was surrounded by a diverse group of supporters: airline executives, civil rights leaders, fellow military officers, and ordinary citizens who had been touched by her story. The crowd that gathered to watch the ceremony was a testament to how far things had come. People of all races, ages, and backgrounds united in their commitment to equality. In her speech at the unveiling, Jasmine reflected on the journey of the past 5 years. "When I stood in this airport 5 years ago, facing discrimination and prejudice, I never could have imagined where that moment would lead," she said. "But I knew then, as I know now, that change is possible if we have the courage to demand it and the persistence to work for it." She went on to emphasize that while much progress had been made, the work was far from over. "We've taken important steps forward," she said, "but we must remain vigilant. Discrimination and bias can take many forms, and they often lurk just beneath the surface. Our job is to keep pushing, to keep questioning, to keep striving for a world where everyone is truly treated with equal dignity and respect." As Jasmine concluded her speech, she looked out at the faces in the crowd. The young people full of hope, the older generations who had seen so much change in their lifetimes, the people of all colors and backgrounds who had come together in this moment. She felt a surge of emotion, a mix of pride in what had been accomplished and determination for the work still to be done. In that moment, Jasmine Carter knew that her experience at Denver International Airport, painful as it had been, had served a greater purpose. It had been a catalyst for change, a moment that had sparked a movement, and while she knew that true equality was still a distant goal, she was heartened by the progress that had been made and the lives that had been touched. As the ceremony concluded and Jasmine made her way through the airport, she was approached by a young African-American woman in an airline uniform. The woman introduced herself as Tanya Robinson, a newly hired pilot for a major airline. "Admiral Carter," Tanya said, her voice filled with emotion, "I just wanted to thank you. Your story, your fight, it's the reason I'm here today. When I was a little girl, I never thought someone like me could be a pilot, but you showed me it was possible." Jasmine was deeply moved by Tanya's words. She reached out and clasped the young woman's hand, seeing in her the future she had fought so hard for. "Thank you, Tanya," she replied warmly. "Remember, every time you step into that cockpit, you're not just flying a plane, you're showing another little girl that she can reach for the sky." As Jasmine continued through the airport, she noticed how different it felt from that day 5 years ago. The staff she encountered were diverse, their interactions with passengers noticeably more considerate and aware. She saw posters promoting inclusivity and respect, reminders of the change that had taken root. Later that evening, as Jasmine sat in her hotel room, preparing for her flight back to Washington the next day, she reflected on the long journey that had brought her to this point. She thought about her childhood in Atlanta, where the idea of becoming an admiral had seemed like an impossible dream. She remembered the challenges she had faced in the Navy, the subtle and not so subtle discrimination she had encountered as she rose through the ranks. Each memory strengthened her resolve. She knew that her fight wasn't just for herself, but for every person who had ever been judged unfairly based on their appearance. It was for the young girls like Tanya who might see her story and dare to dream bigger, and for the countless individuals who face similar prejudices every day without the platform to speak out. The next morning, as Jasmine prepared to board her flight, she was greeted with respect and admiration by the airline staff. As she settled into her seat, she overheard a conversation between two passengers behind her. "Did you hear about the new diversity training program the airline is implementing?" one passenger asked. "Yes, I did," the other replied. "It's about time. My daughter works for another airline and she says it's making a real difference in how they operate." Jasmine smiled to herself, heartened by the casual conversation. It was a small indication that the changes were not just superficial, but were beginning to permeate the culture. As the plane took off, Jasmine's thoughts turned to the future. She knew there was still much work to be done. Discrimination and prejudice were deeply rooted issues that couldn't be solved overnight. But she was more convinced than ever that change was possible. In the years that followed, Jasmine continued to be a powerful advocate for equality and inclusion. She worked tirelessly to expand the Carter Initiative, partnering with organizations across various sectors to implement comprehensive anti-bias training and diversity programs. One of her proudest achievements was the establishment of the Carter Scholarship Fund, which provided financial support and mentorship to minority students pursuing careers in aviation and the military. The fund helped countless young people overcome barriers and achieve their dreams, creating a new generation of diverse leaders in fields that had long been dominated by white men. Jasmine also became a sought-after speaker, sharing her story and insights with audiences around the world. From corporate boardrooms to university lecture halls, she inspired people to confront their own biases and work towards creating more inclusive environments. In one particularly memorable speech at a global aviation conference, Jasmine addressed a room full of industry leaders. The incident at Denver International Airport was a wake-up call, she told them. But it shouldn't take a high-ranking military officer being discriminated against for us to recognize the problem. Every passenger, regardless of their rank or status, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Her words resonated with many in the audience, sparking conversations and commitments to change. In the months that followed, several major airlines announced new initiatives inspired by Jasmine's speech, further expanding the impact of her work. As Jasmine approached retirement from the Navy, she found herself reflecting on the unexpected turn her career had taken. She had joined the military to serve her country, to push herself to her limits, and to break barriers. She had never imagined that she would become a civil rights leader, a voice for change in industries far beyond the military. But as she looked back on all that had been accomplished, the lives changed, the policies reformed, the conversations started, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The incident at Denver International Airport, painful as it had been, had opened doors and created opportunities for change that she never could have anticipated. On the day of her retirement ceremony, Jasmine stood before a crowd of fellow officers, family, friends, and admirers. As she prepared to give her farewell speech, she thought about all the people who had been part of her journey. From the young recruits she had mentored, to the airline executives she had challenged to do better. "When I joined the Navy all those years ago," Jasmine began, her voice strong and clear, "I had a simple goal: to serve my country to the best of my ability. I never imagined the path that lay ahead of me. I never anticipated that a moment of discrimination would lead to a movement for change." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces before her. But that's the thing about service, about leadership. It's not always about the plans we make or the goals we set. Sometimes it's about rising to meet the challenges we never saw coming. It's about standing up for what's right, especially when it's difficult. Jasmine went on to speak about the progress that had been made, the lives that had been touched, and the work that still lay ahead. She encouraged the younger officers in the audience to carry the torch forward, to continue pushing for a military and a society that truly valued diversity and inclusion. As she concluded her speech, Jasmine's voice filled with emotion. "I may be retiring from the Navy today, but I am not retiring from the fight for equality and justice. This is a lifelong mission, one that requires all of us to stay engaged, to keep pushing forward, to never accept discrimination or prejudice as inevitable." The applause that followed was thunderous, a testament to the impact Jasmine had made and the respect she had earned. As she stepped down from the podium, she was engulfed in a sea of well-wishers, each eager to express their gratitude and admiration. Among the crowd was a familiar face, Emily Parker, the gate agent from that fateful day at Denver International Airport. She had traveled from Colorado to attend the ceremony, a journey of both distance and personal growth. When Emily finally made her way to Jasmine, her eyes were filled with tears. "Admiral Carter," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "I don't know if you remember me, but I was the gate agent who—" "I remember you, Emily," Jasmine said gently, taking her hand in hers. "I just wanted to thank you," Emily continued. "That day changed my life. It opened my eyes to my own biases I didn't even know I had. Because of you, because of what happened, I've dedicated myself to promoting diversity and inclusion in my work and my community. You turned a moment of shame into an opportunity for growth, and I'll never forget that." Jasmine was deeply moved by Emily's words. In that moment, she saw the true power of her work, not just in changing policies or practices, but in changing hearts and minds, one person at a time. As the retirement ceremony came to a close, and Jasmine prepared to begin the next chapter of her life, she felt a profound sense of hope. She knew that the fight for equality and justice was far from over, that there would always be new challenges to face and new barriers to break down. But she also knew that she had helped to create a foundation for change, a movement that would continue long after her. Jasmine Carter had started her career as a young woman determined to serve her country. She was ending it as a leader who had not only served, but who had fundamentally changed her nation for the better. As she looked to the future, she was filled with anticipation for what lay ahead. New opportunities to make a difference, new ways to continue the fight for a more just and equitable world. The story of Admiral Jasmine Carter and her experience at Denver International Airport had become more than just a tale of discrimination overcome. It had become a testament to the power of resilience, to the importance of standing up against injustice, and to the possibility of transforming even the darkest moments into catalysts for positive change. As Jasmine left the ceremony that day, she carried with her the knowledge that her work, her struggle, and her triumph had made a real and lasting difference. And she knew that somewhere out there, another young girl was looking up at the sky, daring to dream of a future where she too could soar, not just as a pilot or an admiral, but as a force for change in a world that desperately needed it. The legacy of Jasmine Carter would continue to inspire generations to come, a reminder that one person, standing up for what is right, can indeed change the world. In the years following her retirement, Jasmine's influence continued to grow. She became a respected author, penning a series of books that range from memoirs to children's stories about diversity and inclusion. Her first book, Anchors of Change, My Journey from the Flight Deck to the Fight for Equality, became an instant bestseller, sparking conversations in book clubs and classrooms across the country. Jasmine's work also extended into the realm of policymaking. She was appointed to several advisory boards, including a presidential commission on racial equity in the armed forces. Her experiences and insights helped shape new policies and practices aimed at creating a more inclusive military environment. The Carter Initiative, meanwhile, had grown into a full-fledged nonprofit organization, with chapters in cities across the United States. The organization focused on a range of issues, from promoting diversity in STEM fields to advocating for fair housing practices. Jasmine remained actively involved, serving as the organization's chairperson and continuing to be its most visible spokesperson. One of the most significant developments came 5 years after Jasmine's retirement, when the Congress passed the Carter Act, a comprehensive piece of legislation aimed at combating discrimination in various sectors, including transportation, education, and employment. The act, which drew heavily from the principles of the Carter Initiative, was hailed as a landmark in civil rights legislation. On the day the Carter Act was signed into law, Jasmine stood in the Rose Garden of the White House, surrounded by lawmakers, civil rights leaders, and many of the individuals whose lives had been touched by her work. As she watched the president sign the bill, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This was more than she could have ever imagined when she first joined the Navy all those years ago. But even as she celebrated this monumental achievement, Jasmine knew that the work was far from over. Laws could be passed, policies could be changed, but true equality required a shift in hearts and minds. And so, she continued her work, speaking, writing, and advocating tirelessly for a more just and equitable world. One of Jasmine's most rewarding experiences in her post-retirement years was her work with young people. She became a frequent guest lecturer at universities and high schools, sharing her experiences and inspiring the next generation of leaders. She took particular joy in mentoring young women and minorities who aspired to careers in the military or aviation. In one memorable visit to her old high school in Atlanta, Jasmine spoke to an auditorium full of students. As she looked out at the sea of young faces, she saw reflections of her younger self, full of dreams, ambitions, and the potential to change the world. "When I was your age," she told them, "I never imagined I would become an admiral. I never imagined I would stand in the White House and watch a law named after me be signed. But I did imagine a world where everyone was treated with dignity and respect, regardless of the color of their skin. And that imagination, that dream, gave me the strength to push through every barrier I encountered." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. Each of you has that same power within you. The power to imagine a better world, and the strength to make that imagination a reality. Don't let anyone tell you that your dreams are too big or that the changes you want to see are impossible. Because I'm standing here today as proof that change is possible, that dreams can come true, even in the face of tremendous odds. The impact of Jasmine's words was evident in the faces of the students, eyes shining with inspiration, minds racing with possibilities. After her speech, a line of students formed, each eager to speak with her, to share their own dreams and aspirations. One young girl, her voice trembling with emotion, told Jasmine, "I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to make a difference." Jasmine smiled warmly, placing a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "You don't have to wait until you grow up to make a difference," she said. "You can start right now, today, by standing up for what's right, by being kind to others, by refusing to accept injustice. Every small act of courage and compassion ripples out and changes the world in ways we can't always see." As Jasmine left the school that day, she felt a renewed sense of hope and purpose. She knew that her story, her struggle, and her triumphs were now part of a larger narrative, a story of progress that was still being written, with each new generation adding their own chapters. The years continued to pass, and Jasmine Carter became an elder stateswoman of the civil rights movement. Her once dark hair had turned silver, and lines of experience etched her face. But her spirit remained as fierce and determined as ever. She continued to speak out on issues of equality and justice, her voice carrying the weight of decades of experience and the passion of someone who had never lost sight of their purpose. On her 80th birthday, a grand celebration was held in her honor in Washington, D.C. The event brought together people from all walks of life, military leaders, politicians, civil rights activists, and ordinary citizens whose lives had been touched by Jasmine's work. As she looked out at the gathered crowd, Jasmine felt a sense of awe at the journey her life had taken. In her speech that night, Jasmine reflected on the long arc of progress she had witnessed and been a part of. "When I think back to that day in Denver International Airport," she said, "I'm reminded of how far we've come, but also of how far we still have to go. The work of creating a just and equitable society is never finished. It's a relay race, with each generation passing the baton to the next." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. "I've run my leg of this race, and now it's time for others to carry the baton forward. But know this, I'll be cheering you on every step of the way. Because the dream of equality, the vision of a world where everyone is judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin, that dream is as alive and vital today as it ever was." As Jasmine concluded her speech, the room erupted in a standing ovation. The applause washed over her, a testament to the impact she had made and the lives she had touched. But even in this moment of celebration, Jasmine's thoughts were on the future, on the work still to be done. In the days and weeks that followed, Jasmine received countless messages from people around the world, sharing how her story had inspired them, how her work had changed their lives. Each message reinforced her belief in the power of individual action to create collective change. As she approached the twilight of her life, Jasmine Carter could look back on a journey that had taken her from a young girl dreaming of flying planes to an admiral commanding ships, from a victim of discrimination to a champion of equality. Her life had become a testament to the power of perseverance, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the profound impact that one person can have on the world. The incident at Denver International Airport, which had once seemed like a moment of humiliation and injustice, had become the catalyst for a lifetime of meaningful change. It had sparked a movement, inspired legislation, and touched countless lives. It had transformed Jasmine from a military leader into a civil rights icon, a role she had embraced with the same dedication and courage she had shown throughout her naval career. As Jasmine looked to the future, she felt a deep sense of peace and hope. She knew that the work she had started would continue long after she was gone, carried forward by the countless individuals she had inspired and the changes she had helped to set in motion. The world was far from perfect, but it was better than it had been, and it held the promise of becoming better still. In her final public appearance, at a ceremony marking the 25th anniversary of the Carter Act, Jasmine delivered what would become known as her legacy speech. Despite her advanced age, her voice rang out clear and strong, carrying the wisdom of her years and the passion of her convictions. 25 years ago, we took a significant step forward in our nation's journey toward equality, she began. The Carter Act was not just a piece of legislation, it was a promise that we as a society would no longer tolerate discrimination in any form. Today we gather not just to celebrate what we've achieved, but to recommit ourselves to the work that still lies ahead. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the audience. I stand before you today, not as a hero or an icon, but as a witness to the power of change, to the strength of the human spirit, and to the endless possibilities that arise when we choose to stand up for what is right. Jasmine went on to speak about the progress that had been made since the Act's passage, the increased diversity in leadership positions across various sectors, the reduction in reported cases of discrimination, and the shift in public discourse around issues of race and equality. But she also spoke candidly about the challenges that remained, the persistent wealth gap, the ongoing struggles in education and housing, and the subtle forms of bias that still permeated many aspects of society. The work of creating a truly just and equitable society is never finished, she said, her voice growing more impassioned. It is a task that belongs to all of us, to every generation. We must remain vigilant, we must continue to educate ourselves and others, and we must never become complacent in the face of injustice. As she neared the end of her speech, Jasmine's voice softened, taking on a more personal tone. I've lived a long life, she said, and I've seen both the worst and the best of humanity. I've experienced discrimination that cut me to my core, but I've also witnessed acts of kindness and courage that restored my faith in the goodness of people. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Change is possible. It's not always easy, and it's rarely quick, but it is always worth fighting for. She paused, her eyes glistening with emotion. To the young people here today, and to all those who will carry this fight forward, remember that every act of courage, every stand against injustice, no matter how small it may seem, has the power to change the world. You are the authors of the next chapter in our nation's story. Write it with compassion, with courage, and with an unwavering commitment to justice. As Jasmine concluded her speech, the audience rose to their feet, applauding thunderously. Many were moved to tears, touched by the power of her words and the weight of her legacy. It was a moment that would be remembered and recounted for years to come, a fitting capstone to a life dedicated to service and equality. In the weeks following the anniversary ceremony, Jasmine's health began to decline. She faced this final challenge with the same grace and dignity that had characterized her entire life. Even from her hospital bed, she continued to offer guidance and inspiration to those who sought her counsel. On a quiet morning in early spring, Admiral Jasmine Carter passed away peacefully in her sleep. The news of her death spread quickly, prompting an outpouring of grief and gratitude from around the world. Flags were flown at half-mast, world leaders issued statements of condolence, and countless individuals shared stories of how Jasmine had touched their lives. The state funeral held in her honor was one of the largest in recent memory. People from all walks of life lined the streets of Washington, D.C. as the funeral procession passed by. Among the mourners were presidents and prime ministers, civil rights leaders, and corporate executives, and thousands of ordinary citizens who had been inspired by Jasmine's life and work. In the eulogy delivered by her longtime friend and colleague, Admiral Marcus Reeves, Jasmine was remembered not just for her accomplishments, but for the impact she had on individuals. Jasmine Carter was more than an admiral, more than a civil rights leader, he said. She was a beacon of hope, a source of strength for all who knew her. She showed us that one person, standing up for what is right, can indeed change the world. As the funeral came to a close, a flyover of Navy jets thundered across the sky, performing the missing man formation in honor of their fallen comrade. It was a powerful reminder of Jasmine's military service, the foundation upon which she had built her extraordinary life. In the days and weeks that followed, tributes to Jasmine poured in from around the globe. Books were written about her life, documentaries were produced chronicling her journey, and memorials were erected in her honor. But perhaps the most meaningful tributes were the quieter ones, the conversations sparked in homes and classrooms, the renewed commitments to fighting discrimination, the small acts of courage inspired by her example. At Denver International Airport, where Jasmine's journey as a civil rights leader had begun, a permanent exhibit was installed to honor her legacy. It told the story of that fateful day and the changes it had sparked, serving as a powerful reminder of the ongoing need for vigilance against discrimination. The Carter Initiative, which Jasmine had founded, saw a surge in support following her death. People from around the world, inspired by her life and wanting to continue her work, volunteered their time and resources. The organization expanded its programs, reaching more communities and touching more lives than ever before. In schools across the country, Jasmine's story became a staple of history lessons, teaching students about the power of perseverance and the importance of standing up against injustice. Her books continued to be widely read, inspiring new generations to dream big and to work tirelessly for a more equitable world. 1 year after Jasmine's passing, on what would have been her 90th birthday, a new scholarship was announced in her honor. The Admiral Jasmine Carter Scholarship for Equality and Leadership would provide full funding for minority students pursuing careers in aviation, military service, or public policy. It was a fitting tribute to a woman who had dedicated her life to opening doors for others. As time passed, the world continued to change and evolve, facing new challenges and opportunities. But the legacy of Jasmine Carter remained a guiding light, a reminder of what was possible when courage, determination, and a commitment to justice came together in one remarkable life. The story of Admiral Jasmine Carter, from her humble beginnings in Atlanta to her distinguished naval career to her transformative work as a civil rights leader, had become more than just a chapter in American history. It had become a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of the human spirit, and an enduring call to action for all who dreamed of a more just and equitable world. In the end, Jasmine's life served as a powerful reminder that change, real and lasting change, often begins with a single moment of courage. Her encounter at Denver International Airport, painful as it was, had sparked a movement that continued to ripple outward, touching lives and transforming society in ways she could never have imagined. And so, even in her absence, Jasmine Carter continued to inspire, to challenge, and to lead. Her story lived on, a beacon of hope in a world still striving to live up to its highest ideals. For generations to come, whenever someone faced discrimination, whenever someone stood up for what was right in the face of injustice, they would be walking in the footsteps of Admiral Jasmine Carter, continuing the work she had started and moving ever closer to the dream of true equality for all.